stuck in the frozen forests of Canada, when the wind howls like a dying animal and the trees creak under the weight of ice, something ancient is said to move between the trunks. It doesn't leave footprints or breathe, but it watches and waits. They say if you stay too long in the cold, hunger won't just gnaw at your stomach, it will start whispering. And once you listen, once you give in, the Wendigo takes you. What returns is no longer human. Origin of the myth. The legend of the Wendigo comes from the indigenous peoples of North America, particularly the Algonquian-speaking tribes including the Cree, Ojibwe, and Innu. For them, winter wasn't just a season, it was a test. Blizzards could isolate entire villages, and starvation was a constant threat. During these brutal months, survival came at a price. The Wendigo represented the cost of greed. More than just a monster, the Wendigo served as a moral warning about the spiritual consequences of selfishness and cannibalism. According to oral traditions, when someone gave in to the ultimate taboo of eating human flesh, they ceased to be themselves. Their body twisted and their soul rotted. They became a Wendigo, a creature cursed with an insatiable hunger, never satisfied and always consuming. In the 17th century, French missionaries documented early tales of this creature. One Jesuit priest wrote about tribes that executed members they suspected of being possessed, driven by fear rather than cruelty. They believed the Wendigo could spread like a disease. Once someone began changing, there was no saving them. These weren't stories aimed at children. They were survival codes, warnings passed down through generations, shaped by the real struggles of harsh winters. Descriptions of the Wendigo vary by region, but all share a common theme: grotesque, unnatural hunger. Some portray it as a towering beast, over 15 feet tall, gaunt and skeletal, with skin stretched so tightly over its bones that it tears in places. Its eyes glow like dying embers, and its lips are tattered or missing entirely, chewed away in its desperation to feed. Antlers or deformed animal skulls sometimes crown its head, adding to its nightmarish appearance. Others suggest a more insidious nature, claiming the Wendigo hides inside people. It starts with coldness, then paranoia, and then a hunger that never stops. Until one day, the person vanishes into the forest, and something else returns in their place. No matter the form, the Wendigo is always linked to decay. The smell of rotting meat, the crunch of ice, the sound of distant wailing on windless nights. Different tribes tell the story in different ways. The Plains Cree see it more as a spirit, a force of possession. In the Great Lakes region, it's depicted as a physical, roaming predator. But across all these tales, one truth remains. Once the Wendigo chooses you, there's no escape. In the winter of 1878, a Cree trapper named Swift Runner emerged from the woods near Fort Saskatchewan, Canada, alone. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. When Mounties questioned him about his family, he confessed to something horrific. During a harsh winter, stranded with no food, he had killed and eaten his wife and children. But there was something deeper in his confession. Swift Runner claimed he had been possessed. An evil spirit had taken hold of him, whispering to him through the trees and pushing him to feed. Elders of his tribe believed it was the Wendigo. He had become one. Although emergency supplies were just miles away, he never sought help. He chose hunger. Swift Runner was hanged for his crimes, but the legend didn't die. Locals claimed they saw a shadow in the trees near the execution site long after he was buried. The Wendigo Cabin. Decades later, in the 1940s, two hunters took shelter in an old trapping cabin deep in Ontario's woods. They were experienced men, familiar with snow and solitude. On the third night, one of them began acting strangely. He muttered to himself, stared at the fireplace for hours without blinking, and refused to eat the food they had packed. On the fourth night, he disappeared into the woods barefoot. His friend searched for hours and eventually found him kneeling in the snow, sobbing and chewing on his own hand. He was rescued and later institutionalized. Doctors labeled it a psychotic break. Locals called it something else. They burned the cabin to the ground. As frightening as these stories are, science offers another perspective. Wendigo psychosis, a rare syndrome where individuals develop an intense craving for human flesh and a fear of becoming a cannibal. This term was coined in the early 20th century by psychologists trying to explain behavior like swift runners. While the condition is debated today, with many questioning whether it was a real disorder or simply misunderstood trauma, it highlights the power of belief in shaping perception. When your culture warns that hunger leads to evil, your mind may start to believe it. Some anthropologists argue that Wendigo stories were used to enforce social taboos during times of starvation. Others see it as a way to explain mental illness before the advent of modern psychology. There are also natural explanations. Sightings of creatures in frozen forests could be starved bears or diseased moose, or might stem from hallucinations caused by extreme cold and isolation. Hypothermia and sleep deprivation can lead to vivid and terrifying visions. Still, no theory fully explains the chilling consistency of Wendigo reports over centuries and thousands of miles. Nor does it account for the fear that lingers in these communities even today. The Wendigo straddles the line between folklore and psychology, a creature born from cultural memory, survival fear, and something much older than science. It reminds us that our minds can be our worst enemies, especially when nature's cruelty pushes us to our limits. Whether it's a demon, a spirit, or a symptom, the Wendigo represents the fear of losing control and becoming less than human. And maybe that's why the legend continues to thrive. Deep down, we all fear what hunger, whether for food, power, or something darker, might turn us into. So the next time you find yourself alone in the woods and the wind whispers through the trees, ask yourself, what if, on the coldest nights, it still hunts?